Picture for a moment a sound that chills you to the bone, echoing through the deepest forests and the darkest nights of human history. That primal howl under a full moon speaks to something ancient and deeply embedded in our collective psyche. For thousands of years across countless cultures, the legend of the werewolf has both terrified and fascinated us. But where did this terrifying myth truly begin? What primal fear gave birth to the idea that a human could transform into a wolf, becoming a creature of the night driven by insatiable hunger and rage? This is more than just a campfire story or a Hollywood trope. The werewolf legend is one of humanity's most enduring and widespread myths, appearing in various forms from the frostbitten woods of Scandinavia to the sun-scorched villages of rural France, from the epic poems of ancient Rome to the oral traditions of Native American tribes. It's a story that has refused to die, evolving across millennia but always centered on that same haunting idea, the blurring of the line between human and beast, between civilization and the wild lurking just beyond the firelight. And the most compelling part, this isn't just a monster story, it's a mirror, a reflection of our deepest anxieties about ourselves, our nature, and the darkness we fear lives within us all. Join me as we journey back through time, tracing the origins of the werewolf from its earliest whispers in prehistoric cave art and Bronze Age rituals to the witch trials of the Renaissance and the Gothic novels that shaped the modern monster. We'll explore how real historical events, psychological fears, and even medical conditions may have fueled the legend, turning abstract terror into a face we still recognize today. This is a story about how myth is born from memory, how fear takes shape, and why some legends are simply too powerful to ever truly fade away. So stay with me, because what you're about to discover will change how you see one of history's most iconic monsters, and perhaps even the animal lurking within us all. To understand the birth of this legend, we must travel back further than written history, to a time when our ancestors were not the apex predators they would later become. For the earliest hominids, the world was a place of immense danger, and the darkness beyond the safety of a fire was filled with very real, very lethal threats. Among the most formidable of these threats were large carnivores, and few creatures struck as much primal fear into the human heart as the wolf. This wasn't a monster from a story, this was a genuine competitor, a skilled hunter whose success rate on the hunt likely surpassed our own for millennia. The echoing howl of a pack on the hunt wasn't a cinematic trope, it was a sound that signaled imminent danger, a reminder of one's own vulnerability in the food chain. This deep-seated biological fear of predation is arguably the very bedrock upon which the werewolf myth was built. It's a fear so ancient it's woven into our very DNA, a relic from a time when being caught alone at night could mean a gruesome death. This primal anxiety didn't just vanish with the invention of tools or the rise of complex societies. Instead, it was sublimated, transformed by the human imagination. The fear of the wolf as a simple animal began to merge with a more complex, more terrifying concept: the fear of the wolf as a cunning, almost supernatural force. This is where oral tradition takes over, the first crucible of the myth. Before the written word, stories were our primary technology for making sense of the world and its dangers. Around campfires, our ancestors would have recounted harrowing tales of narrow escapes, of lost hunters, and of the creatures that stalked the woods. In these stories, the wolf's attributes were exaggerated, its intelligence magnified, its ferocity amplified. It became more than an animal. It became a symbol of the untamable wild, an embodiment of chaos that stood in direct opposition to the order and safety of the tribe. But the most profound leap, the moment the proto-werewolf was truly conceived, was when these stories began to explore the horrifying idea of transformation. What could be more frightening than the wolf itself? The idea that the wolf's savagery could exist within a person, that the civilized human form could betray you and become the very thing you feared most. This concept of shape-shifting speaks to a fundamental human anxiety about our own duality. We have always been aware of the beast within, the primal instincts for violence and survival that civilization forces us to suppress. The early, whispered tales of men becoming wolves were a way to externalize that internal conflict, to give a face to the fear that the thin veneer of humanity could crack, unleashing something monstrous. These stories served as powerful cautionary tales, reinforcing social bonds and tribal laws by illustrating the horrific fate that awaited those who succumbed to their basest instincts, who rejected the community and embraced the wild. The werewolf, in its most ancient form, was never just a monster, it was a warning against the wilderness outside our gates and the wilderness we carry inside ourselves. While our deepest fears of the wolf were forged in the prehistoric dark, the very first written evidence of these anxieties being woven into a narrative comes from a place many might not expect: the sun-baked river valleys of ancient Mesopotamia. It is here, inscribed on crumbling clay tablets in the ancient language of cuneiform, that we find the world's oldest surviving great work of literature, the Epic of Gilgamesh. And within this epic, we encounter a figure who stands as a profound and ancient precursor to the werewolf myth, not a monster but a wild man named Enkidu. Created by the gods as a foil to the arrogant King Gilgamesh, Enkidu is described as a primitive being, innocent of mankind, who was raised by wolves and ran with the herds of wild animals. He is covered in shaggy hair, possesses immense strength, and lives a purely instinctual life, disrupting the order of civilization by freeing animals from hunters' traps. Enkidu is the ultimate embodiment of the untamed wilderness, a human in form but an animal in spirit. He represents the raw, unfiltered state of nature that civilization, in the form of Gilgamesh, must ultimately confront and integrate. This is not a story of a monstrous transformation under a full moon, but rather a deeply symbolic exploration of the divide between the wild and the civilized, and the potential for a single being to exist in both realms. The pivotal moment in Enkidu's story is not a transformation into a beast, but a transformation out of one. Through a ritualistic encounter with a woman named Shamhat, he is seduced and introduced to human ways, eating bread, drinking beer, and learning the customs of the city. This act of civilization tames him. The animals he once called family now flee from him because he has become wise and, like a god, he has lost his wild innocence but gained human knowledge and purpose. In this ancient narrative, we see the core themes that would later define the werewolf legend, but in reverse. Instead of a civilized man falling to bestial urges, we have a bestial man being elevated to civilization. The anxiety is the same, the fragile, permeable boundary between human and animal. Enkidu's entire existence challenges the simple binary of man versus beast. He is the original human-animal hybrid, a creature who blurs the lines and forces the audience to question what truly makes us human. Is it our physical form or our behavior? Our community or our instincts? The Epic of Gilgamesh doesn't provide easy answers, but it firmly establishes this duality as a central concern of human storytelling. The werewolf myth, millennia later, would tap into this exact same source of anxiety, but would frame it as a horrifying curse, a regression from civilization back to the wild, a loss of the very humanity that Enkidu worked so hard to gain. This ancient Mesopotamian tale shows us that long before we feared the beast within, we were already telling stories about the beast we left behind. But if the Epic of Gilgamesh presents a philosophical exploration of our wild origins, the ancient Greeks gave us something far more visceral and terrifying, a divine punishment so severe it would echo through the centuries and become the very namesake of the condition. To find the cornerstone of the Western werewolf tradition, we must turn to the chilling myth of King Lycaon of Arcadia, a story meticulously recorded by the poet Ovid in his masterpiece, The Metamorphoses. This isn't a tale of accidental transformation or a shamanic ritual. This is a story of blasphemy, cannibalism, and a god's wrath made manifest in the most horrifying way imaginable. The myth begins with a god walking among mortals. Zeus, the king of the Olympian gods, had grown weary of the rumors of humanity's wickedness and decided to see for himself. Disguised as a humble traveler, he sought hospitality at the palace of King Lycaon, a ruler known for his savage impiety. Lycaon, either suspicious of his divine guest or simply consumed by his own cruelty, decided to test the god's omniscience in the most grotesque way possible. He murdered a hostage taken from a neighboring tribe, butchered the body, and served the flesh to Zeus as a meal, a horrific act meant to see if the god would recognize the nature of the feast. Zeus's response was immediate and cataclysmic. He unleashed a thunderbolt that utterly destroyed Lycaon's palace, wiping his hall of kings from the face of the earth. But for the king himself, Zeus reserved a far more poetic and enduring punishment. As Ovid writes, Lycaon was overcome with a maddening rage, his clothes transforming into a shaggy coat of fur, his arms twisting into legs, and his very face contorting into the snarling muzzle of a wolf. The tyrant who had mocked the divine was now condemned to become the very beast his name evoked, Lycaon, from the Greek Lykos for wolf. He was driven by his new bloodlust to slaughter livestock, his howls becoming the only language he had left, a permanent exile from the world of men. The transformation of Lycaon is a pivotal moment in mythic history because it codifies several core themes that would define the werewolf for centuries to come. First and foremost, it establishes lycanthropy not as a choice or a skill, but as a curse, a direct and brutal punishment from the gods for committing an unspeakable sin. The wolf transformation is the ultimate mark of shame, a physical manifestation of the moral corruption that already festered within the man. Lycaon wasn't turned into a wolf because he was evil. His inner evil was so profound that turning him into a wolf was the only fitting expression of it. This creates a powerful link between the beast and the sinner, the monster and the criminal. Furthermore, the story brilliantly inverts the act that triggered the curse. Lycaon, the cannibal, becomes the wolf, the predator that devours raw flesh. His punishment forces him to live out the brutal nature of his crime for all eternity. This myth provided a foundational template, the werewolf as a divine condemnation, a walking symbol of a human's fall from grace, forever trapped in a form that reflects their deepest sin. Yet, even as the Greeks wove divine punishments into their myths, a different kind of story was being recorded, one that claimed these transformations were not just legend but observable fact. We find this remarkable shift not in a book of poetry, but in one of history's first great works of ethnography, written by a man often called the father of history himself. In the 5th century BC, the Greek writer Herodotus traveled the known world, collecting stories and customs from various cultures to create his monumental work, the Histories. It is within these pages that we encounter a people whose very existence seemed to challenge the boundary between man and wolf, moving the concept of shape shifting from the realm of myth into the realm of, at least to Herodotus, reported reality. Herodotus introduces us to the Neuri, a tribe he places somewhere north of Scythia, in a land that would likely correspond to modern-day Belarus or Western Russia. He describes them as neighbors to the Scythians, but crucially, he marks them as different as other. And their most defining characteristic, according to the tales that reached his ears, was an annual ritual that defied all Greek understanding of nature. Herodotus reports that once every year, each member of the Neuri tribe would undergo a profound transformation. For a period of several days, they would shed their human form and become wolves, roaming the forests in packs before eventually returning to their human lives. Now, Herodotus, to his credit, does not present this as an undisputed fact he has witnessed himself. He carefully frames it as a story told to him by the Scythians and the Greeks who lived in the trading post of Olbia on the Black Sea coast. He even includes a note of skepticism, writing that the tale is but a fable and that he does not believe it, but the mere act of recording it is what makes this account so incredibly significant. This is no longer a story about a long-ago king punished by the gods. This is a contemporary for his time account of an entire culture that was widely believed to possess the innate communal ability to transform. This shifts the werewolf archetype dramatically. With the Neuri, lycanthropy is not a curse placed upon a single individual for a grievous sin. Instead, it appears as a collective, almost cyclical phenomenon, tied to the calendar and seemingly woven into the very fabric of their cultural identity. It becomes a trait of an entire people, marking them as mystically powerful and deeply connected to the natural world in a way the civilized Greeks were not. This portrayal taps into a common ancient trope, the idea that distant, barbarian tribes possessed strange and fearsome magic unknown in the Mediterranean world. The account of the Neuri served to exoticize and mystify these northern peoples, framing their land as a place where the normal rules of reality did not apply. Whether the Neuri truly believed this about themselves, or whether the story was a piece of ethnographic gossip invented by their neighbors to explain their reclusive or fearsome nature, we will never know. But Herodotus's record is a vital linchpin in the evolution of the werewolf legend. It represents the moment the idea of transformation began its journey out of the sacred space of mythology and into the secular world of anthropology and geography. It planted the seed that such things might not just be the stuff of old poems about angry gods, but could be a latent power within certain humans living in the remote, shadowy corners of the earth. This subtle but profound shift would eventually help the werewolf crawl out of the pages of Ovid and into the dark forests of medieval Europe, where the legend would take on a new and far more sinister life. While the Greeks gave us the foundational curse and the first ethnographic rumors, it was the Romans who truly brought the werewolf story down to earth, injecting a new layer of gritty, psychological horror. We see this shift most vividly not in a lofty epic poem, but in a raucous, satirical novel that holds the distinction of containing the first ever full-blown werewolf narrative in Western literature. This story comes from the pen of Petronius, a courtier in the reign of Emperor Nero, and it appears in his fragmented work, the Satyricon. Told by a character at a drunken dinner party, the tale is a masterpiece of grotesque humor and chilling detail, marking a significant evolution in how the transformation was portrayed. The storyteller is a freedman named Niceros, who begins his account with an air of bewildered credibility, swearing by the genius of his emperor that he is telling the truth. He recounts a journey to visit his lover, accompanied by a soldier he describes as a man of immense courage and strength. They stop in a lonely grove around midday, and the soldier announces he needs to step off the path to relieve himself. Niceros waits, but as time drags on, he grows anxious and begins to call out. There is no answer. When he finally ventures into the grove to investigate, he makes a horrifying discovery. He doesn't find his friend. Instead, he finds the man's clothes meticulously folded and piled neatly on the ground. And circling the pile is a massive, fully grown wolf, which lets out a terrifying howl before bolting into the woods. Terrified, Niceros continues his journey, sword drawn, only to arrive at his destination and receive more shocking news. His lover's estate manager informs him that a short while earlier, a wolf had broken into the sheepfold and savaged the livestock. But the wolf didn't get away clean. One of the farmhands, in a heroic act, had managed to drive a spear through the beast's neck. Hearing this, a stunned Niceros immediately rushes back to the soldier's house. There he doesn't find a wolf, but he doesn't find a healthy man either. He finds the soldier lying in bed with a doctor desperately trying to treat a grievous spear wound to his neck. In that moment, the horrifying truth clicks into place for Niceros. The folded clothes were the key. The transformation wasn't a messy, biological process. It was a magical act that required the man to shed his human identity, literally and symbolically, by removing his garments. The wolf was the soldier, and the wound he received on the farm was now mystically present on the man's body. This story is a quantum leap forward for the myth. Petronius, through Niceros, introduces several elements that would become staples of werewolf lore for centuries to come. First and foremost, this is our earliest detailed account of the actual mechanics of transformation. The act of undressing becomes a crucial, almost ritualistic part of the process, symbolizing the shedding of humanity. It's a detail that adds a layer of eerie practicality to the magic. Secondly, the story establishes the concept of a wound sustained in wolf form carrying over to the human body, a rule that would later be used in countless stories as a way to reveal the werewolf's secret identity. But perhaps most importantly, Petronius grounds the horror in a relatable, almost mundane setting. This isn't a king being punished by Zeus, it's a soldier, a regular guy who possesses this terrifying ability. The horror comes from the betrayal, the idea that the person walking beside you on a public road could harbor such a monstrous secret. The Satyrician's werewolf is less a divine warning and more a personal nightmare, a story that suggests the monster could be anyone, even your trusted companion. Yet the classical world was not the only ancient culture wrestling with this potent fusion of man and wolf. Far to the north, in the frost-laden air of Scandinavia, an entirely different tradition was taking shape, one not of cursed kings or strange tribes, but of elite, fearsome warriors who actively sought to become the beast. This is the world of the Norse Ulfhednar and their infamous cousins, the Berserkers. These were not monsters hiding in the shadows, they were celebrated, if also feared, figures who stood at the very heart of Viking Age combat, and their practices offer a crucial and terrifyingly voluntary piece of the werewolf puzzle. The term Ulfhednar literally translates to wolf-coated or wolf-skinned ones. They were a specific class of warrior often associated with the god Odin, who fought in a state of ecstatic, trance-like fury known as Berserker Gang. Clad not in iron mail but in the pelts of wolves, they sought to channel the spirit, the ferocity, and the primal power of the wolf itself in the heat of battle. Their counterparts, the Berserkers or bear shirts, did the same with the spirit of the bear, but the underlying principle was identical: a deliberate and ritualistic shedding of their human civility to tap into a raw, animalistic power that made them unstoppable on the battlefield. Historical accounts and sagas describe these warriors as entering a state of uncontrollable rage before a fight. Their eyes would glaze over, they would gnaw on the rims of their shields, foam at the mouth, and let out bestial howls or roars. They were said to feel no pain, to possess immense inhuman strength, and to cut through enemy lines with a frenzy that seemed almost supernatural. To their foes, they must have appeared as something far more than human, demonic entities or actual shape-shifters who had forsaken their humanity for the gift of slaughter. This was not a punishment, it was a desired outcome, a state of being achieved through intense rituals, possibly involving the consumption of psychotropic substances like hallucinogenic mushrooms or strong alcohol, combined with chants and dances designed to invoke the animal spirit within. This concept of the voluntary beast warrior adds a profound new dimension to the werewolf myth. Unlike Lycaon, who was transformed against his will as a divine punishment, the Ulfhednar actively pursued this transformation. They saw the power of the wolf not as a curse but as a tool, a weapon to be mastered and unleashed. Their transformation was psychological and spiritual, a temporary possession by an animal fylgja or familiar spirit, rather than a physical metamorphosis. Yet to the terrified onlookers, the effect was the same. A man had ceased to be a man and had become a wolf in everything but his literal form. He fought with a wolf's pack mentality, he displayed its savagery, and he emitted its terrifying aura. The legacy of the Ulfhednar demonstrates how the line between myth and reality, between metaphor and belief, could become dangerously thin. These warriors were very real historical figures, yet their practiced ferocity fed directly into the folklore of the time. Stories inevitably grew around them, tales that blurred the memory of their battle trances with older, deeper superstitions about actual shape-shifting. They became living proof in the minds of their contemporaries that the boundary between man and wolf was not fixed. A man could, through will, ritual, and rage, cross over into that bestial state. This Norse tradition provided a compelling model for the werewolf, not as a lone, cursed outcast, but as a member of a powerful, secretive cult, a man who could call upon the wolf at will and use its power for his own ends. It was a short step from believing a warrior could channel the spirit of the wolf to believing he could physically become one under the right conditions, forever intertwining the image of the Viking in a wolf skin with the nightmare of the werewolf. While the Norse Ulfhednar represent a fearsome warrior tradition, another ancient culture offered a far more complex and surprisingly sympathetic vision of the wolf man. To find it, we must turn to the misty hills and rich oral traditions of the Celtic world, particularly to a fascinating and unique legend from Ireland that stands in stark contrast to the monstrous werewolves of Greco-Roman myth. This is the story of the werewolves of Ossory, a tale that doesn't speak of curses or divine punishment, but rather of a sacred pact and a peculiar form of exile that preserved the humanity within the beast. The story is preserved in a remarkable text from the 12th century, written by a Welsh cleric named Geraldus Cambrensis, or Gerald of Wales. Geraldus was a chronicler and travel writer who journeyed through Ireland, collecting local stories and marvels to report back to a Norman audience. In his book, The Topography of Ireland, he recounts a tale told to him by a priest about a parishioner's strange encounter. According to the priest, a man and his wife were traveling through a deep forest in the region of Ossory, an ancient kingdom that covered parts of modern-day County Laois and County Kilkenny, when they were suddenly approached by a lone, imposing wolf. But instead of attacking, the wolf did something utterly unbelievable. It spoke to them. The wolf addressed the terrified couple in a clear, human voice, offering them comfort and reassurance. It explained that it was not a mere animal, but a human being from the people of Ossory, transformed into this lupine form. This transformation, the wolf revealed, was not a random curse but a specific, cyclical affliction that struck a certain clan or family within Ossory every 7 years. 2 individuals, a man and a woman, were chosen by divine will to shed their human skins and live as wolves for that 7-year period. When their time was up, they would return to human form, and 2 others would take their place. What makes this Celtic legend so distinct is the profound humanity the werewolves retain. The wolf that spoke to the travelers was not a mindless beast. It was a rational, conscious person trapped inside an animal's body, fully aware of its past and its predicament. This being even possessed a deep, abiding faith. The talking wolf then made a heartfelt plea to the travelers. Its wolf companion, its wife, was dying. It begged the humans to stay with her and, following the customs of their faith, to offer her the last rites before she passed from this world. The priest in Geraldus's story claims the travelers, astounded but convinced by the creature's earnestness, did indeed stay and perform a Christian service for the dying she-wolf. As she passed, the witnesses reportedly saw her form subtly shift, the wolfish features receding to reveal the face of an old woman just before she died. This incredible detail bridges 2 worlds: the ancient pagan belief in shape-shifting and the new Christian worldview of the time. The werewolf's soul was still human, still deserving of spiritual comfort and salvation. The legend of the Ossory werewolves offers a radically different perspective on lycanthropy. Here, the transformation is presented not as a punishment for sin, but as an inherited duty or a sacred, if tragic, jays, a magical taboo or obligation in Celtic lore. It is a condition to be endured with dignity, not a descent into evil. The afflicted individuals maintain their reason, their speech, and their emotional connections. They feel love, fear, and devotion. This portrayal suggests a deep Celtic understanding of the interconnectedness of all life, a world where the boundaries between human and animal were seen as more fluid and less absolute than in the classical Mediterranean cultures. The wolf was not merely a symbol of savagery, it could also be a guardian, a teacher, and a respected part of the natural order. In this Irish tale, the werewolf becomes a figure of tragedy and pathos, a being to be pitied and understood rather than simply feared and hunted. It is a powerful reminder that the howl in the night might not always be a threat. It might sometimes be a cry for help from a lost soul caught between two worlds. As our journey through the myth continues eastward, we enter the deep, primeval forests of Eastern Europe, where the werewolf legend takes on a darker, more complex and deeply spiritual character. The vast and varied tapestry of Slavic folklore weaves its own unique and terrifying threads into the story, introducing beings that are far more than just men who turn into wolves. Here we encounter two particularly potent concepts, the Volkodlak and the Volkodlak, terms that reveal a world where the boundaries between monster, man, and spirit are perilously thin. In many Slavic traditions, the Volkodlak, a word stemming from vuk or volk for wolf and dilaka for hair or pelt, is a familiar figure. This is the classic werewolf, a human with the ability to transform into a wolf, but the reasons for this change are distinctly Slavic. Often, this transformation was believed to be the result of a curse, sometimes placed by a wronged individual or even by the devil himself. A person might be born a Volkodlak if they entered the world with a caul, the amniotic membrane still covering their head, a birthmark, or even a full set of teeth. These physical signs were interpreted as omens, marking the individual for a life touched by the supernatural. Unlike the cursed kings of Greece, the Slavic Volkodlak was often an unwilling participant in their fate, a victim of circumstance or malign magic rather than personal sin. Their transformations were frequently tied to specific times, the full moon, of course, but also certain nights of the year, particularly during the ominous period between Christmas and Epiphany, when the veil between the natural and supernatural worlds was believed to be at its thinnest. These werewolves were not just predators, they were seen as servants of dark forces, their actions bringing blight to crops and terror to villages. But the Slavic imagination did not stop there. It took the terror a step further by creating a truly horrifying hybrid, a monster that combined the worst traits of two legendary predators. This is the Volkodlak, a concept so potent it fused the ravenous hunger of the wolf with the undead thirst of the vampire. The Volkodlak was not merely a living person who changed form. It was often believed to be a werewolf that, upon death, refused to stay dead. Cursed even in the afterlife, it would rise from its grave to continue its predations. By night, it might appear as a gaunt, monstrous wolf with glowing eyes or even a shambling, wolf-like humanoid corpse. It would stalk the countryside, draining the life from livestock and people, not just eating flesh but sometimes drinking blood, spreading disease and misfortune wherever it walked. This creature was a true embodiment of pestilence and death, a far cry from the tragic figures of Ossuary or the cursed kings of Greece. The methods for dealing with a Volkodlak were as brutal as the creature itself, mirroring the vampire-slaying practices found throughout Eastern Europe. To prevent a suspected Volkodlak from returning as a Volkodlak, the body might be buried face down so that if it tried to dig its way out, it would only go deeper into the earth. A stake made of hawthorn or ash could be driven through its heart, or in especially feared cases, the body might be decapitated with a gravedigger's spade, the head then placed between its knees to confuse it and prevent it from rising. These practices highlight a profound cultural anxiety about the dead, a fear that a sinful life or an unclean death could corrupt the soul so completely that it would return as a physical abomination. The Volkodlak became a powerful symbol of that fear, a warning that evil in life could lead to an eternity of monstrous hunger. In the dark forests of Slavic lore, the howl of the wolf wasn't just the sound of an animal, It was a portent, a reminder that the line between an earthly predator and an undead terror was terrifyingly easy to cross. This profound shift in perception from tragic outcast to demonic fiend was cemented by the rising tide of medieval Christianity. As the Church's influence spread across Europe, it systematically sought to overwrite the old pagan beliefs that had sustained communities for centuries. The ancient, fluid concepts of shape-shifting found in Celtic or Norse traditions, where the line between human and animal could be one of duty or spiritual power, were utterly incompatible with the Christian worldview. In this new theological framework, the human form was a sacred, immutable gift from God. The very idea that a person could alter their shape was not just impossible, it was heretical, a blatant defiance of divine order. If such a transformation appeared to occur, there could be only one explanation. It was an illusion crafted by the devil himself. The Church Fathers began to preach that werewolves were not real physical beings, but rather suffering individuals under a powerful demonic delusion. This doctrine, known as lycanthropy as a mental disease, was formally argued by influential theologians like St. Augustine. He proposed that Satan, the great deceiver, clouded the minds of both the so-called werewolf and any witnesses, making them believe a man had become a beast. It was a terrifying trick, a mass hallucination designed to lead people into superstition and away from God. This intellectual stance allowed the Church to deny the physical reality of transformation while still acknowledging the terrifying phenomenon as a very real tool of evil. But as the medieval period wore on and the fear of witchcraft began to reach a fever pitch, this somewhat academic view curdled into something far more sinister and literal. The werewolf was pulled directly into the burgeoning witch hunters' manuals and the paranoid rhetoric of the Inquisition. It became inextricably linked with witchcraft, another crime believed to be fueled by a pact with the devil. The narrative was simple and devastating. A person, usually a woman accused of witchcraft but sometimes a man, would renounce God and pledge their soul to Satan. In exchange for this allegiance, the devil would grant them unholy powers, one of which was often the ability to shapeshift into a wolf. A salve or ointment made from infernal ingredients, frequently said to contain the fat of murdered infants, was applied to the body to facilitate the change. This wasn't a magical skill or a family curse, it was a purchased feature of damnation. This association transformed the werewolf from a potential victim of circumstance into a willing agent of pure evil. The medieval werewolf was no longer a tragic figure to be pitied, but a dangerous heretic to be hunted and burned. Their actions were no longer just about hunger, they were acts of sacrilege against God and community. Sermons from pulpits across Europe painted vivid pictures of these demon worshippers running in packs, desecrating churches, and devouring children as a perverse mockery of the Eucharist. The werewolf became the ultimate symbol of the apostate, the human who had willingly turned their back on salvation to serve darkness. This new perception had devastating real-world consequences. During the great witch trials that swept through Europe from the 15th to the 17th centuries, accusations of lycanthropy became a common feature in the testimonies extracted under torture. In France and Germany particularly, numerous cases detailed confessions of attending witches' sabbaths in the form of a wolf and committing atrocities at the devil's command. The most infamous of these trials, like that of the German farmer Peter Stump in 1589, ended in horrific public executions, with the accused being brutally tortured, dismembered, and burned at the stake to ensure the demonic beast could never return. This deliberate demonization by the medieval church fundamentally and permanently altered the werewolf's place in our collective nightmare. It injected the legend with a new kind of metaphysical horror, the fear of eternal damnation. The monster was no longer just a threat to your physical body. It was a threat to your very soul, a corrupting influence that represented the ultimate spiritual betrayal. This created a template of pure, uncomplicated evil that would later be streamlined by Gothic fiction and Hollywood, forever cementing the werewolf as a creature of the moon, of pain, and of a curse that could only be passed through a bite, a literal infection of the soul. The howl in the dark now carried the chilling echo of a broken covenant, a sound that signaled not just a predator on the hunt, but a sinner beyond redemption. Yet it was in the small, rain-soaked German town of Bedburg in 1589 that the Church's theoretical demonology and the state's brutal legal machinery converged to produce one of the most chilling and definitive werewolf cases in history. The story of Peter Stump, a wealthy and seemingly ordinary farmer, is a horrifying window into how societal panic, religious fervor, and personal vendettas could coalesce into a perfect storm of persecution, forever branding a man as the Werewolf of Bedburg. His trial and exceptionally gruesome execution were not an isolated incident of superstition, but a calculated public spectacle designed to purge the community of evil and reinforce a terrified social order. The accusations against Stump were as monstrous as they were comprehensive, painting a picture of a man who had wholly surrendered his humanity to Satan. Under the relentless agony of torture on the rack, he confessed to a litany of crimes that read like a witch hunter's manual of atrocities. He claimed he had made a pact with the devil at the age of 12, receiving a magical belt that granted him the power to transform into a greedy, devouring wolf, strong and mighty, with eyes great and large, which in the night sparkled like fire, a mouth great and wide, with most sharp and cruel teeth, a huge body and mighty paws. In this form, he confessed to having savagely killed and devoured 14 young children and 2 pregnant women, tearing the fetuses from their wombs to eat their sweethearts. The court records further accused him of incest with his own daughter and of using his demonic wolf form to attack and kill his neighbor's livestock. The sheer breadth and graphic nature of the charges served a clear purpose: to erase any possible doubt of Stump's guilt and to depict him as the ultimate embodiment of sin, a glutton, a murderer, a sexual deviant, and an apostate all in one. But to view the Stump case as merely the result of blind superstition is to miss its terrifying political and social dimensions. Bedburg was located in the Rhineland, a region brutally torn apart by the Cologne War, a violent conflict between Protestant and Catholic forces. Stump was a Protestant living in a territory that had recently been reclaimed by the Catholic Prince-Elector Ernst of Bavaria. His trial was far from a local affair. It was overseen by the highest authorities. Many historians argue that Stump's wealth and land made him a target, and the sensational charges of lycanthropy and witchcraft provided the perfect, morally righteous pretext for the state to seize his property and eliminate a prominent Protestant figure, thereby cementing Catholic control and warning others who might resist. His alleged crimes were a convenient narrative that allowed the ruling powers to present themselves as the saviors of the people, purging a literal monster from their midst while consolidating their own political and religious authority. The punishment delivered upon Peter Stump was meticulously designed to be a direct, brutal reflection of his alleged crimes and to ensure his complete annihilation, both physical and spiritual. He was not simply burned, he was subjected to an elaborate and horrific public execution. First, his skin was torn from his living body with red-hot pincers. Then his limbs were shattered with the blunt side of an axe. Finally, he was decapitated, and his body was burned on a wheel raised high on a pole for all to see. His head was mounted on a separate stake next to the crude effigy of a wolf, a lasting grisly monument to his sins. This wasn't just an execution, it was a form of symbolic magic. Every act of violence upon his body was meant to undo the evil he had supposedly wrought, to tear the wolf's skin from the man, to break the limbs that had run as a beast, and to prevent his corrupted soul from ever rising again. The case of the Werewolf of Bedburg stands as a grim testament to how a legendary monster could be weaponized, transforming a folktale into a tool for legal murder, property seizure, and ideological control. proving that sometimes the most terrifying wolves are the ones manufactured by the society that fears them. Yet, even as the flames from Peter Stump's pyre faded into history, the terror of the werewolf was far from over. It simply migrated, finding new fertile ground not in the tortured confessions of a single man, but in the very real, very bloody soil of a remote French province. In the 1760s, a full 2 centuries after the Bedburg trial, the legend of the werewolf was violently resurrected, not by superstition or religious dogma, but by a series of attacks so brutal and so inexplicable that they would convulse the entire nation of France and become the most infamous predator case in European history. This is the story of the Beast of Gévaudan. Between 1764 and 1767, in the rugged, mountainous region of Gévaudan in south-central France, a nightmare descended upon the countryside. Something was hunting the local populace, particularly women and children tending livestock in the isolated fields. The attacks were not the quick, efficient kills of a typical wolf. They were characterized by a shocking and almost personal brutality. Reports described a creature of immense size, far larger than any known wolf, with a broad, powerful chest, a strangely elongated head, and reddish-brown fur marked with dark stripes along its back. Its methods were what truly inspired terror. It was not merely content to kill for food. It seemed to hunt for sport, often decapitating its victims and leaving their bodies mutilated. It displayed an uncanny intelligence, evading traps and hunts time and again, and a baffling boldness, attacking people in broad daylight, sometimes right on the outskirts of villages. The death toll climbed into the dozens, then over 100, plunging the entire region into a state of paralyzing fear. In an age of growing Enlightenment rationalism, the official response from Paris was initially dismissive. King Louis XV dispatched professional wolf hunters and dragoons, expecting them to quickly cull a rogue wolf or a pack. But as the hunters failed again and again, their professional confidence turned to bewilderment. The creature they were tracking didn't behave like any animal they knew. Its tracks were strange, its resistance to normal tactics was supernatural, and its apparent taste for human flesh over easier prey was baffling. This failure of conventional explanation created a vacuum, and into that vacuum rushed the old, deep-seated folk beliefs of the peasantry. For them, the evidence was clear. This was no ordinary loup or wolf. This was a loup-garou, a werewolf. The whispered theories began to circulate. Perhaps it was a nobleman cursed for his sins. Maybe it was a sorcerer who had made a pact with the devil, sent to punish the people of Gévaudan. The beast's alleged invulnerability to normal weapons fed this belief. It was said only silver bullets could harm it, a detail that would cement itself in werewolf lore forever thanks to these very events. The story of the Beast of Gévaudan became a national sensation, splashed across the fledgling newspapers of Paris, known as canards. These pamphlets, often illustrated with dramatic and wildly inaccurate engravings of the monster, sold like wildfire, spreading the hysteria far beyond the provincial borders. The beast was no longer a local problem. It was a national mystery, a symbol of a wild, untamable force threatening the very heart of civilized France. The pressure on the king became immense. He eventually sent his own personal gun-bearer, François Antoine, who in September of 1765 shot a very large wolf, which was then stuffed and presented to the king. The attack ceased for a time, and Paris declared the matter closed, but the nightmare wasn't over. Months later, the killings began again with the same horrific signature. This second wave of violence utterly destroyed the official narrative and cemented the beast's legendary status. If the king's own man had killed the beast, what was stalking Gévaudan now? A local hunter, Jean Chastel, finally ended the reign of terror in June of 1767 by shooting a second large creature. Legend, of course, insists he used bullets cast from a silver chalice blessed by a priest, though historical records are murky on this point. The attack stopped for good. The true identity of the beast of Gavorden remains one of history's great unsolved mysteries. Zoologists and historians have proposed numerous theories: a particularly large and aggressive Eurasian wolf, a wolf-dog hybrid, a surviving prehistoric predator like a dire wolf, or even an escaped exotic animal such as a striped hyena. Some suggest the attacks were the work of a serial killer using a trained animal, or a series of different predators blamed on a single mythical creature. But the truth is ultimately less important than the profound cultural impact. The beast of Gavorden represented the perfect storm where reality and folklore collided. It was a real predator whose actions were so extraordinary that they could only be explained by the supernatural framework of the werewolf myth. This wasn't a story invented by the church or confessed under torture. It was a terror witnessed by hundreds, reported in the press, and investigated by the state. It proved that even in the age of reason, the ancient fear of the man-beast was still alive, waiting in the deep woods for something to give it form. The beast gave the werewolf legend a terrifying shot of credibility, moving it from the pages of fairy tales into the headlines of the daily paper, and forever linking the monster to the chillingly practical solution of a silver bullet. While the monstrous beast of Gavorden stalked the fields of France, the ancient forests of the far north held their own, even older traditions of the wolfman, concepts rooted not in panic but in a deep, almost sacred understanding of the natural world's cycles. In Scandinavia, the werewolf was known as the Werewolf, a compound of vag or ulv, meaning wolf, and ulfa, a term for a wolf but also carrying connotations of an outcast or criminal. This linguistic link itself is revealing, tying the creature to the idea of one who lives outside the law, beyond the boundaries of the community. But the Norse Werewolf was more than just a synonym for a monster. It represented a distinct set of beliefs that would profoundly influence the legend's evolution, particularly through its early and explicit connection to the most powerful celestial body in the night sky, the moon. Norse mythology and its accompanying folklore are rich with themes of transformation and cyclical change, concepts deeply intertwined with the passage of time and the rhythms of nature. It is within this worldview that we find some of the earliest and most potent seeds connecting lycanthropy to lunar phases. This association predates its popularization in Gothic literature and Hollywood by centuries, finding its roots in the observances of ancient peoples who lived by the seasons and the sky. The Norse, along with many other pagan cultures, recognized the moon as a powerful force, a celestial body that governed the tides, influenced the growth of crops, and illuminated the darkness. Its cyclical nature, waxing, full, waning, and new, made it a perfect metaphor for transformation itself, a constant, visible reminder that nothing is static, that all things are in a state of flux. The full moon, in particular, represented a peak, a moment of maximum power and potency, a time when the veil between worlds was believed to be thin and magic was at its strongest. It was believed that a werewolf's power was tied directly to this lunar cycle. The curse or ability to transform was not constant, it ebbed and flowed with the moon. The most common belief held that the affliction would be at its most potent and irresistible during the 3 nights of the full moon. This was not merely a convenient plot device, it was a reflection of a deep-seated cultural logic. The full moon's brilliant light was a double-edged sword. It illuminated the night, making it easier for a predator to hunt, but it also revealed the hunter, stripping away the cover of darkness. For a werewolf, this meant the time of its greatest power was also the time of its greatest exposure and vulnerability. This connection created a terrifying predictability to the threat. Communities knew that when the moon was full, the danger was at its height, and they would take precautions, reinforcing doors and keeping children close to home. This lunar link transformed the werewolf from a random, constant threat into a periodic force of nature, as predictable and inexorable as the tides the moon itself controlled. This belief was often intertwined with the concept of the Ulfhidna, the wolf warriors we discussed earlier. While these berserkers primarily channeled the wolf spirit through ritual and frenzy, some sagas and folktales suggest that their ceremonies were timed to coincide with specific lunar phases to harness its latent energy. The line between a warrior willingly invoking a bestial state and a man cursed to transform against his will began to blur under the moon's pale light. In the Norse imagination, the moon was not a passive observer but an active participant in the magic of the world, a silent god that could pull the beast from within a man whether he sought it or not. This ancient Scandinavian framework provided the foundational stones upon which the modern werewolf archetype was built, forever linking the creature's curse to the haunting silver glow of the full moon. While the mythologies of Greece and Rome spun terrifying tales of divine curses and monstrous transformations, a very different kind of mind was also at work, observing these phenomena not through the lens of superstition, but through the burgeoning science of medicine. Long before the medieval church declared lycanthropy a demonic illusion, ancient physicians were already cataloging it as a recognizable mental affliction, a disease of the mind and body that they called lycanthropia. This clinical approach offers a fascinating and often overlooked perspective, showing us that even in the ancient world, some sought to understand the beast within through diagnosis and remedy rather than fear and condemnation. The most detailed surviving account comes from a somewhat obscure but important figure, Marcellus of Side, a Greek physician who practiced during the reign of the Roman emperors Marcus Aurelius and Commodus in the 2nd century CE. In his extensive medical text De Medicamentis, a comprehensive encyclopedia of remedies and treatments, Marcellus dedicates a section to this peculiar malady. He describes lycanthropia with a physician's detached eye, noting its characteristic symptoms with remarkable consistency. Those afflicted, he wrote, were typically found wandering around at night during the month of February, imitating wolves in all respects. They would haunt cemeteries, their eyes hollow and sunken, their skin parched and pale, their legs often covered in sores and wounds from their nocturnal wanderings. They were plagued by a terrible thirst and a profound melancholy, utterly withdrawn from human society and connection. What makes Marcellus's account so groundbreaking is his attempt to explain the root cause. He didn't attribute the condition to a wrathful god or a demonic pact. Instead, he pointed to an imbalance of the body's essential fluids, a theory rooted in the dominant medical doctrine of the time, the concept of the four humors. Greek medicine, established by figures like Hippocrates and later expanded by Galen, held that health was a state of balance between four bodily fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. An excess or deficiency of any one humor could lead to both physical and mental illness. Melancholy or depression, for instance, was thought to be caused by an overabundance of black bile. Marcellus seems to have classified lycanthropia as an extreme and violent form of melancholy. The patient's mind, drowned in this dark, depressive humor, would concoct a terrifying delusion that perfectly externalized their internal darkness, the belief that they were becoming a wolf, the ultimate symbol of solitude, savagery, and isolation. But Marcellus didn't stop at diagnosis. He proposed a treatment, and his prescribed cure is a fascinating window into ancient medical practices. It was a holistic regimen aimed at rebalancing the humors and shocking the patient back to reality. He advised a course of powerful purges and emetics, strong medicines designed to violently expel the excess black bile from the body. This physical cleansing was to be combined with a psychological intervention. The physician was to startle the patient by suddenly shouting their name aloud, a technique meant to break the spell of their delusion and re-anchor them in their own identity. Furthermore, he recommended therapeutic baths and the application of specific ointments. Perhaps most intriguingly, his treatments often involved bloodletting, the ancient world's go-to cure for a vast array of ailments. The logic was straightforward. If the illness was caused by an excess of a corrupt humor, releasing that humor directly from the body through a carefully measured bleed was the most direct path to restoring balance. Marcellus of Side was not entirely alone in this clinical observation. Centuries earlier, the renowned Roman encyclopedist Aulus Cornelius Celsus, in his work De Medicina, had also briefly mentioned a form of insanity he called insania lupina, wolf madness, though he provided far less detail. What unites these early medical writings is their fundamental perspective. For these physicians, the werewolf was not a supernatural monster but a suffering human being. The howling in the cemetery was not the sound of a demon but the cry of a deeply troubled psyche. Their work represents a crucial, rationalist thread in the tapestry of the werewolf legend, an attempt to drag the phenomenon out of the shadows of myth and into the light of clinical observation. They recognized that the terror of transformation could be born from within the human body itself, a pathology of the mind that was as real and as treatable as any fever or physical wound. This ancient medical model, though based on a flawed understanding of biology, was ironically far more humane than the demonological interpretations that would follow in the Middle Ages, reminding us that the desire to understand and heal this profound affliction is as old as the myth itself. But to truly grasp the deepest and most ancient roots of the werewolf myth, we must venture even further back, beyond the written records of historians and the diagnoses of physicians, into the realm of spiritual belief and ritual practice. Long before the Greeks told of Lycaon's punishment or the Norse spoke of the Werewolf, human communities around the globe were exploring the boundaries of human and animal consciousness through the world's oldest spiritual profession, shamanism. This is not a story of curses or madness, but of sought-after transcendence, where the transformation into a wolf was not a monstrous affliction but a sacred skill, a means of tapping into the primal power of the natural world for the benefit of the tribe. Anthropologists studying indigenous cultures from the frozen tundra of Siberia to the dense rainforests of South America have documented a near-universal belief in the shaman's ability to shapeshift. The shaman, a mediator between the human community and the spirit world, was believed to possess the power to project their consciousness into an animal form, or to be temporarily inhabited by an animal spirit. This spiritual journey, often induced by rhythmic drumming, chanting, fasting, or the use of sacred psychoactive plants, was a deliberate and controlled act. The goal was to acquire the animal's attributes, its strength, its senses, its cunning, to achieve something vital for the people's survival. A shaman might become an eagle to soar to the upper world and speak with celestial spirits, or a bear to gain its healing power, or, most significantly for our story, a wolf to ensure a successful hunt. In these traditions, the wolf was revered, not feared. It was the ultimate hunter, a master of coordination and strategy whose survival was directly tied to the well-being of its pack. For a shaman to take on the spirit of the wolf was to channel this profound expertise. In a trance state, the shaman would spiritually join the wolf pack, learning the movements of the herd, identifying the weakest animal, and psychically guiding the human hunters to their prey. This was a sacred contract between human and animal. The hunt was not seen as mere slaughter, but as a respectful exchange where the life of the animal was taken with gratitude to ensure the life of the community. The wolf was a teacher and an ally, and the shaman who could wear its skin in the spirit realm was a revered and crucial figure. We can even see echoes of this incredibly ancient practice in the very cave art left by our Paleolithic ancestors. On the walls of caves like Trois Freres in France, dating back over 15,000 years, among the stunning depictions of bison and deer, there is a remarkable figure known as the sorcerer. This enigmatic painting shows a hybrid creature with the legs of a human, the antlers of a stag, the eyes of an owl, and the tail of a horse or wolf. While its interpretation is debated, many archaeologists and anthropologists believe this figure represents a shaman in a state of ritual transformation, a powerful visual testament to a belief system where the lines between human, animal, and spirit were fluid and permeable. This artistic evidence suggests that the conceptual seeds of the werewolf, the idea of a human incorporating the essence of a powerful animal, are tens of thousands of years old, rooted in a universal human desire to understand and harness the forces of nature. This shamanic perspective reframes the entire mythology. It suggests that the terrifying werewolf of later European folklore is a distorted echo of a once sacred archetype. What began as a voluntary, controlled, and community-oriented spiritual practice performed by a respected holy person was gradually demonized and twisted over millennia. As ancient pagan religions were supplanted by new, centralized faiths that demanded a strict separation between the human and animal realms, these old practices were driven underground. The shaman, once a revered mediator, became viewed as a witch or a sorcerer consorting with dangerous spirits. The voluntary journey of the soul was reinterpreted as an involuntary, demonic possession of the body. The sacred act of borrowing a wolf's power for the hunt became a monstrous curse of uncontrollable bloodlust. The ally became a monster, and a profound spiritual technology was lost, leaving only the terrifying shell of the story behind. This ancient and deeply ingrained fear of the wolf and the monstrous human it could become naturally gave rise to an equally powerful desire for protection. If the werewolf was a pervasive and terrifying threat woven into the very fabric of folklore, then humanity would inevitably seek to weave a defense right back into it. Two methods in particular have become synonymous with repelling these creatures, their origins as fascinating and ancient as the myth itself: the deadly herb wolfsbane and the precious metal silver. Let's begin with the plant, known scientifically as aconite, but far more famously in legend as wolfsbane or monkshood. Its connection to wolves is primal and brutally practical, rooted not in magic, but in its very real and very gruesome use as a poison. The ancient Greeks were intimately familiar with its lethal properties. They called it aconiton, and it featured prominently in their arsenal of natural poisons. Its most infamous use was in the execution of criminals and enemies of the state. In a practice that chillingly echoes the myth of Lycaon, condemned individuals in some city-states were forced to consume a toxic brew made from the root of the wolfsbane plant. The poisoning was a slow and agonizing process, with symptoms that included numbness, vomiting, convulsions, and ultimately, paralysis of the heart and lungs. To the ancient mind, the horrific physical contortions and the foaming at the mouth that accompanied this death must have looked eerily like a monstrous transformation in itself, a violent rejection of one's humanity in its final moments. But its use wasn't limited to killing people. The plant earned its common name, wolfsbane, from its widespread employment as a predator control method. Hunters and shepherds would smear the potent sap of the plant on arrows or bait meat, leaving it out for wolves that threatened their livestock. The neurotoxins in the plant would quickly paralyze and kill the animal. So the plant's primary historical association with wolves was as a tool for their extermination. Over centuries, this practical application underwent a symbolic alchemy. If wolfsbane could kill a natural wolf, then surely its power could extend to the supernatural wolf, the werewolf. The plant's very essence became associated with anti-wolf properties, and so it was adopted into folklore as a potent ward. The belief emerged that even the mere presence of the plant could repel a werewolf, its scent or essence acting as a barrier that the creature could not cross. Gardeners might plant it around their homes, and travelers might carry a dried piece of the root as a talisman. The real-world poison had successfully transformed into a mythical antidote, a natural guardian against the unnatural. The second legendary defense, the silver bullet, has a more complex and layered origin, weaving together ancient metallurgy, early medicine, and profound spiritual beliefs. Long before it was a bullet, silver was revered across numerous ancient cultures for its peculiar and seemingly magical properties. The ancients observed that silver, unlike other metals, did not tarnish or rust easily. It retained its brilliant, moon-like luster, seemingly immune to the corrupting effects of time and the elements. This perceived purity made it a natural symbol of the divine and the incorruptible. In many traditions, it was considered a sacred metal associated with the moon, the sun, and various gods and goddesses of protection and healing. This belief in silver's purity gave rise to its use as a talisman against impurity in all its forms, including disease, witchcraft, and evil spirits. There was a widespread folk belief that supernatural entities, born of darkness and corruption, were inherently vulnerable to that which was pure and uncorrupted. This is why you find traditions of wearing silver jewelry to ward off the evil eye, or placing silver coins in milk to keep it from spoiling, a practice that had the very real side effect of the silver's mild antibacterial properties preventing souring. Vampires, ghosts, and fairies were all said to be repelled by the metal. The werewolf, as a creature fundamentally impure, a perversion of nature and a vessel of evil, naturally fell into this category. It was believed that a weapon made of pure silver would bypass any magical invulnerability the beast might possess, striking at the corrupt heart of the curse itself. The leap from a general protective talisman to a specific projectile was likely a gradual one, forged in the fires of later European folklore and then cemented by real-world events like the Panic of the Beast of Gévaudan. As we discussed, the beast's alleged resistance to normal lead musket balls led to the popular insistence that only silver could harm it. This fused the ancient symbolic power of the metal with the emerging technology of firearms. The creation of a silver bullet became the ultimate expression of this belief, a fusion of sacred purity and lethal force, a single, precious, and purpose-made instrument designed to cancel out a specific supernatural threat. It was the perfect solution for a monster that was both physically formidable and spiritually corrupt, requiring a response that addressed both aspects of its terrifying existence. Thus, a metal once valued for its beauty and purity became forever locked in a legendary struggle against the ultimate symbol of bestial impurity. While the fears of the ancient world and the rituals of shamans provided a primal foundation, the werewolf myth also drew powerful symbolic fuel from a source that would become the bedrock of medieval European thought, the Bible itself. Within its pages, specifically in the Old Testament book of Daniel, lies a story that medieval priests and scholars would later point to as divine proof of the beast within man, a cautionary tale of divine punishment that perfectly aligned with their demonizing view of lycanthropy. This is the strange and profound story of King Nebuchadnezzar II of Babylon, a narrative not of a physical metamorphosis into a wolf, but of a psychological and spiritual descent into pure bestiality. The story, found in the 4th chapter of Daniel, is presented as a first-person decree from the humbled king himself, explaining the signs and wonders the Most High God had worked upon him. At the peak of his power, Nebuchadnezzar was the absolute ruler of a vast empire, a man whose pride knew no bounds. Standing on his palace roof, he boasted, "Is not this the great Babylon I have built as the royal residence by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty?" This utterance of supreme arrogance was the trigger for his downfall. A voice from heaven pronounced his judgment. He would be driven away from human society to live with the wild animals, eating grass like an ox, until he learned that the Most High is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth and gives them to anyone he wishes. The punishment was swift and horrifying. The text states, "He was driven away from people and ate grass like the ox. His body was drenched with the dew of heaven until his hair grew like the feathers of an eagle and his nails like the claws of a bird." For 7 years, the great king lived as a beast of the field, his reason utterly gone, his humanity stripped away not in form but in essence. He no longer walked on 2 legs in a palace, he crawled on all 4s in the wilderness. He did not dine from a golden plate, he grazed on raw grass. His appearance became feral, his hair matted and wild, his nails growing long and curved like talons. This was not a physical shape-shifting into a specific animal, but a total regression to a pre-human, animalistic state. He became a beast in mind, spirit, and behavior, while still retaining the basic physical shape of a man. For medieval Christian scholars grappling with werewolf stories, the tale of Nebuchadnezzar was a theological goldmine. Here was a case straight from divine scripture that confirmed their core beliefs about lycanthropy. It was not a magical skill or a pagan blessing. It was a punishment from God for the sin of pride. Nebuchadnezzar's transformation was a direct result of his hubris, his refusal to acknowledge a power higher than himself. This provided the perfect biblical parallel to the story of Lycaon, who was punished by Zeus for his impiety. The Church could now argue that the werewolf phenomenon, in all its variations, was merely another manifestation of this same divine principle. When a man elevates himself to the level of a god or succumbs to deepest sin, God may strip him of his reason, the very thing that separates man from animal, and leave him a ravening beast. This interpretation allowed theologians to neatly categorize werewolf accounts without having to affirm the physical reality of a man's body changing into a wolf's. Instead, they could point to Nebuchadnezzar and say the transformation was one of state and mind, a spiritual and mental affliction that made a man believe he was a wolf and behave accordingly, all while under the withering judgment of God. His bestial existence lasted for a set period, 7 years, which echoed the cyclical nature of many European werewolf legends, and his eventual restoration, which came only after he raised my eyes toward heaven and my sanity was restored, served as a powerful lesson in humility and divine sovereignty. The story of Nebuchadnezzar became a crucial piece of evidence in the Church's campaign to reframe pagan shape-shifting legends into cautionary tales about Christian morality, providing a scriptural anchor for the idea that the beast within was unleashed not by magic but by sin. While the story of Nebuchadnezzar offered a powerful theological framework, another Roman mind, just a few centuries later, approached the mystery of the werewolf from an entirely different angle, not through the lens of scripture, but through the emerging discipline of natural science. This brings us to the monumental work of Gaius Plinius Secundus, better known to history as Pliny the Elder, and his encyclopedic endeavor, Naturalis Historia, or Natural History. In this sprawling 37-volume compilation, Pliny sought to document all known knowledge of the natural world, from geography and botany to anthropology and astronomy. It is within this context of Roman empiricism that we find one of the earliest surviving attempts to rationally document and explain the persistent belief in human-to-wolf transformation, not as a divine punishment or a demonic trick, but as a curious cultural practice of a distant people. In Book Roman 8 of his Natural History, which deals with the nature of land animals, Pliny turns his attention to the wolf. After detailing its physical characteristics and habits, he includes a brief but profoundly significant digression. He references a strange tale concerning a specific tribe in the remote, mountainous region of Arcadia in Greece, the same land once ruled by the mythical Lycaon. According to Pliny, there was a persistent belief that a member of a certain Arcadian family was chosen by lot and led to an isolated mountain lagoon. There, the individual would hang their clothing on a tree, swim across the body of water, and upon reaching the other side would be transformed into a wolf. They would then roam with a pack for 9 years. If they managed to abstain from tasting human flesh throughout that entire period, they were permitted to return to the lagoon, swim back across, and resume their human form, albeit 9 years older. Pliny's account is a fascinating hybrid of ethnographic reporting and personal skepticism. He is not recounting this as a proven fact he has witnessed, but rather as a notable and widely circulated belief that had reached Roman ears. His tone is that of a compiler of curious information, a gatherer of the world's wonders and oddities, yet he subtly distances himself from outright belief. He prefaces the account by noting that it may cause the reader to entertain no doubt about anything, implying that such a fantastical story should be taken with a grain of salt. This positioning is crucial. Pliny is not endorsing the reality of physical transformation. He is simply recording its place in the belief systems of other cultures. In doing so, he performs a revolutionary act for his time. He treats the werewolf not as a monster from a myth or a subject for theological debate, but as an anthropological phenomenon worthy of documentation and preliminary analysis. What makes Pliny's contribution so pivotal is his method. He is attempting, within the limited scientific framework of the 1st century, to apply a form of rational inquiry to a supernatural claim. By specifying the location Arcadia and outlining a specific, almost ritualistic procedure involving a geographical feature and a time limit, he grounds the fantastical story in a tangible, observable reality. He provides a how and a where, moving the discussion beyond vague whispers and into the realm of a reported cultural practice. This approach represents a significant step away from the poetic metaphors of Ovid and towards a proto-scientific curiosity about the origins of human belief. Pliny was essentially asking the same question a modern anthropologist would, not "is this real?" but "why do these people believe this is real, and what function does this belief serve in their society?" The choice of Arcadia is itself deeply symbolic and likely not accidental. For the Romans, Arcadia was the quintessential pastoral wilderness, a land associated with the rustic god Pan, with ancient mysteries, and with a simpler, more primal way of life that stood in stark contrast to the sophisticated urbanity of Rome. By locating this strange practice there, Pliny and his sources were effectively othering it, placing it at a safe geographical and cultural distance. The werewolf was not a threat lurking in the Italian woods. It was a strange superstition of a backward, mountainous people on the periphery of the empire. This allowed Roman readers to marvel at the story without having to genuinely fear its implications for their own safety. Pliny's work, therefore, stands as a critical bridge in the evolution of the werewolf legend. It captures the moment when a terrifying supernatural fear began its long journey toward becoming a subject of intellectual curiosity, a strange footnote in the vast and mysterious catalogue of the natural world, documented by one of history's first great encyclopedists. Moving from the realm of texts and oral traditions, we now turn to the silent but equally compelling testimony left behind in stone, pigment, and metal. To find the most ancient echoes of the human-wolf connection, we must venture into the deep, silent galleries of prehistoric caves, where our ancestors first gave form to the creatures that haunted their world and their imaginations. While no cave painting explicitly labeled werewolf exists, numerous pieces of ancient art strongly suggest a profound and early blurring of the lines between human and animal, providing a tantalizing visual prehistory for the shape-shifting myths to come. One of the most powerful and debated examples is the enigmatic figure known as the sorcerer, found deep within the caverns of Les Trois Frères in Ariège, France. This stunning painting, estimated to be over 15,000 years old, depicts a peculiar composite creature. It stands upright on human legs, but its head is crowned with the massive antlers of a stag. Its eyes are wide and owl-like, its beard resembles that of a man, yet it possesses the tail of a horse or possibly a wolf, and its posture suggests a dancing, ritualistic motion. While interpretations vary, many prominent archaeologists and anthropologists, including the cave's early explorer Abbé Henry Breuil, argued this figure represents a shaman in the midst of a ritual transformation. The sorcerer is not merely a man wearing a costume. It is a deliberate artistic fusion of multiple species, a visual metaphor for a spiritual state where the human consciousness has merged with the power and essence of the animal world. This image powerfully suggests that the conceptual seeds of the werewolf, the idea of a human incorporating a powerful animal's identity, are tens of thousands of years old, rooted in a universal spiritual practice rather than a fear of monsters. This theme of hybridity is not isolated to a single French cave. From the sprawling complex of Lascaux to more recent discoveries, Paleolithic art is rich with figures that defy easy categorization. A fascinating, though less famous, example can be found in the cave of Font de Gaume, also in France. Here, among the majestic depictions of bison, a curious figure appears to show a bison with a human-like leg, again hinting at a permeable boundary between species in the minds of the artist. These images were not doodles, they were sacred art created in the most inaccessible and ritualistic spaces of the ancient world. They strongly imply that for our earliest ancestors, the ability to transcend one's human form and access the strength, speed, or wisdom of an animal was not a curse, but a sought-after spiritual skill, a crucial technology for survival, hunting, and healing that was depicted on the walls of their most holy places. As we move forward in time from the Paleolithic to the Metal Ages, the evidence becomes more direct and widespread. Across ancient Europe, artifacts begin to explicitly depict figures that straddle the human and the lupine. A remarkable example comes from the Celtic world. A stone carving from the Iron Age found in Holzgerlingen, Germany, depicts a naked male figure wearing a belt and a stark, unmistakable wolf's head. This isn't a realistic portrait of a man with a wolf. It is a symbolic representation of a wolf man, a being whose identity is fundamentally merged. Similarly, numerous Celtic artifacts, including coins and small statues, show warriors or deities wearing wolf pelts, often with the animal's head acting as a helmet. These are powerful representations of the Berserker and Ulfhidnar traditions we discussed earlier, providing tangible proof that the concept of adopting a wolf's identity for battle was not just a story, but a practice significant enough to be immortalized in art and currency. The ancient Greek world also contributed its own archaeological evidence, though it often interpreted the wolf man through a lens of mythology and fear. Numerous pieces of pottery from the classical period depict the story of Lycaon's transformation. On these vases, we see the terrified king mid-metamorphosis, his limbs twisting, his face elongating into a snarling muzzle, often surrounded by a horrified court. These depictions were a form of popular storytelling, making the myth visible and reinforcing its lesson about the dangers of impiety. But they also show that the idea of a physical, bodily transformation from man to wolf was a concept the ancient Greeks could visualize and accept within their cultural framework. The art served to make the abstract terror of the myth concrete, providing a shared image of what divine punishment for such a transgression would actually look like. Perhaps one of the most evocative and concrete archaeological finds comes from the Scythian culture of the steppes. The Scythians, nomadic warriors who roamed from the Black Sea to Mongolia, left behind magnificent gold artifacts in their burial mounds known as kurgans. Among these treasures, we find plaques and ornaments depicting griffins and mythical beasts, but also more grounded hybrid figures. Most notably, excavations have uncovered actual ritual headdresses and ceremonial wear incorporating wolf teeth, claws, and imagery. For a shamanic culture like the Scythians, who believed in spirit animals and the power of transformation, wearing these items was not merely decorative, it was an act of spiritual invocation. By adorning themselves with the parts of a wolf, they were attempting to channel its spirit to gain its ferocity and hunting prowess. This archaeological evidence provides a direct link between the spiritual concept of transformation represented in cave art and the physical rituals that would eventually fuel the werewolf legends of later centuries. Each gold plaque depicting a wolf, each ceremonial headdress made from its pelt, was a step on the long road from sacred ritual to the terrifying folklore of the shapeshifter, a journey etched not only in stories but in the very artifacts our ancestors left behind for us to discover. But the haunting figure of the Wolfman is not a singular nightmare confined to the European experience. In fact, the deep-seated human anxiety about the permeable boundary between ourselves and the animal kingdom has manifested in strikingly similar legends across the globe, proving that the werewolf is just one expression of a universal human fascination. From the steaming jungles of Mesoamerica to the dense forests of Southeast Asia, cultures separated by vast oceans and millennia have independently crafted their own terrifying tales of human-beast transformation, each one reflecting the unique predators and spiritual beliefs of their homeland. This global tapestry of shape-shifter myths reveals that our fear of the beast within is a fundamental part of the human condition, a story we have told ourselves in 1,000 different ways. Perhaps the most powerful parallel to the European werewolf emerges from the ancient civilizations of Mesoamerica, the word jaguar. For the Olmec, Maya, and Aztec cultures, the jaguar was not merely a feared predator. It was a sacred entity, a symbol of the night, the underworld, and immense shamanic power. It was the undisputed king of the Central and South American jungles, a creature whose silent tread and crushing strength inspired both terror and profound reverence. This duality is perfectly captured in the word jaguar concept. The Olmecs, one of the region's earliest complex societies, left behind a stunning artistic legacy of figures that blend human and jaguar features, so-called word jaguar statues and masks with downturned, snarling mouths and feline eyes. These were not likely meant to represent literal monsters, but rather spiritual beings or shamans who had harnessed the jaguar's power, transforming into a hybrid state to act as intermediaries between the human and spirit worlds. This connection between transformation and spiritual authority is a key difference from the European model. While the medieval werewolf was almost always a cursed outcast or a willing servant of the devil, the Mesoamerican word jaguar was often a figure of immense, though fearsome, power. Aztec mythology tells of the Nahul or Nagual, a sorcerer or witch who possessed the ability to transform into their animal companion spirit, often a jaguar, to wield power or enact their will. The jaguar's association with the night and the underworld made it the perfect familiar for these dark sorcerers. Becoming a word jaguar was less about losing control to a bestial curse and more about consciously accessing a potent, dangerous force for specific purposes, be they protective or malevolent. This reflects a world view where the lines between human, animal, and spirit were seen as more fluid and less morally absolute than in the later European tradition. The beast was not simply a monster, it was a source of potent, ambivalent power that could be channeled by those who knew the rituals. Journeying across the Pacific to Asia, we encounter another iconic predator dominating the shape-shifter mythology, the tiger. Throughout Southeast Asia, China, and the Indian subcontinent, the word tiger legend is every bit as pervasive and terrifying as its European counterpart. In the folklore of countries like Malaysia and Indonesia, the story of the Harimau Jadian or Orang Jadi Jadian, the tiger shape-shifter, is a common fixture. Much like the Nahul, these individuals were often believed to be shamans or witches with the secret knowledge to assume tiger form. Their transformations were sometimes described as a conscious act, achieved through meditation, spells, or by rolling on the ground. However, a more chilling version suggests the change was involuntary, triggered by the onset of a sudden, overwhelming rage, a concept that directly mirrors the loss of control in European lycanthropy. The motivations ascribed to these were tigers also provide a fascinating cultural mirror. In many stories, they transform to seek revenge against those who have wronged them, acting as brutal enforcers of a twisted form of justice. Other tales describe them as guardians of the jungle, protecting its sacred spaces from human encroachment and disrespect. This adds a layer of environmental morality to the myth, framing the transformation not just as a personal affliction but as a consequence for violating natural law. In the Bengal region of India, folklore speaks of tigers who are actually witches that shed their skins at night to hunt. If a human finds and steals this skin, the witch is trapped in human form and forced to serve them. This motif of the hidden skin is a powerful narrative device found in shape-shifter stories worldwide, symbolizing the literal and figurative shedding of one's humanity. The Asian tiger tradition beautifully illustrates how the same core concept, human-to-predator transformation, is adapted to reflect local fears, fauna, and deeply held beliefs about karma, community, and humanity's place in the natural order. Even the vast continent of Africa has its own rich traditions of human-animal transformation, though they often follow a different spiritual logic. Across many African cultures, the concept of the shape-shifter is frequently tied to the idea of a skinwalker, or a witch who can don the pelt of an animal, be it a hyena, a leopard, or a crocodile, to travel swiftly and unseen, often to cause harm or practice dark magic. In West Africa, particularly among the Edo people of Nigeria, the legend of the Ewa involves men who transform into leopards to act as killers for secret societies. This echoes the European association of lycanthropy with secret cults and organized evil. The choice of animal is, as always, culturally specific. The hyena, often a despised scavenger in Western thought, is a particularly potent and feared shape-shifter in East African folklore, like among the Mbugwe people of Tanzania, where witches are believed to ride hyenas at night. These traditions show that the specific animal is less important than its symbolic power within that culture. The predator that embodies the greatest threat or possesses the most potent spiritual symbolism becomes the vessel for the shape-shifter myth. This incredible global consistency points to a profound psychological truth. The prevalence of these myths suggests that the fear of our own inner beast, the animal within, is a universal human archetype. We see it in the Norse berserker's battle fury, the Mesoamerican shaman's jaguar transformation, and the Asian witch's tiger form. Each culture projects this internal struggle onto the most powerful and awe-inspiring predator in its environment, creating a narrative framework to explore the terrifying potential of our own repressed instincts for violence, rage, and primal hunger. The werewolf and its global cousins are more than just campfire stories. They are ancient, shared tools for wrestling with the most fundamental question of what it means to be human. They are cautionary tales about the consequences of unleashing our dark side, and in some traditions, they are also stories about harnessing that power, reminding us that the line between monster and god, between curse and power, is often terrifyingly thin. While the myth of the werewolf was taking shape through stories of divine curses and warrior cults, a different kind of mind was also at work, one that sought not to fear or worship the beast, but to understand and heal it. In the bustling centers of ancient Greek and Roman medicine, physicians were already grappling with the phenomenon of lycanthropy, not as a supernatural event, but as a diagnosable and treatable medical condition. Their approaches, a fascinating blend of keen observation and the limited scientific theories of their time, reveal a surprisingly humane and rational effort to cure what they saw as a profound melancholy of the soul. The most detailed surviving account of this clinical approach comes from the Greek physician Marcellus of Side, who practiced in the 2nd century CE during the height of the Roman Empire. In his extensive medical compendium, De Medicamentis, he dedicates a section to what he calls lycanthropia, describing its symptoms with the detached eye of a clinician. He writes of patients who are found wandering cemeteries alone at night, their skin parched and pale, their legs covered in sores from their nocturnal travels. Their eyes were hollow and sunken, and they were plagued by a terrible thirst and a deep, unshakable melancholy that severed their connection to human society. Crucially, Marcellus placed a specific timestamp on the affliction, noting these episodes were most common during the month of February, a time often associated in the ancient world with purification rituals and the thin boundary between winter and spring. Marcellus's genius, however, lay not just in his description, but in his proposed cause and cure. He rooted his explanation in the dominant medical theory of the era, the concept of the four humours. Greek medicine, established by Hippocrates and expanded by Galen, held that health was a balance of four bodily fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. An excess of black bile, known as melancholia, was believed to cause melancholy, a state of severe depression and withdrawal. Marcellus took this a step further, classifying extreme lycanthropy as the most violent and delusional form of this condition. He theorized that an overwhelming surplus of this dark, depressive humor literally flooded the mind, creating a powerful delusion that externalized the patient's internal torment. The patient didn't just feel like a lonely, savage outcast. Their corrupted mind convinced them they had physically become one, the wolf being the ultimate symbol of those very traits. His prescribed treatment was a holistic regimen designed to rebalance the humors and shock the patient back to reality. He advised a course of powerful purgatives and emetics medicines like black hellebore to violently expel the excess black bile from the body. This physical cleansing was to be paired with a psychological intervention. The physician was to startle the patient by suddenly shouting their name, a technique meant to break the spell of their delusion and re-anchor them in their own identity. Furthermore, he recommended therapeutic baths, the application of specific ointments, and perhaps most famously, the practice of bloodletting. The logic was direct. If the illness was caused by an overabundance of a specific humor, the most effective cure was to carefully drain that humor directly from the body, often from a vein behind the elbow, in a measured attempt to restore the body's natural equilibrium. Marcellus was not entirely alone in this clinical curiosity. Centuries earlier, the renowned Roman encyclopedist Aulus Cornelius Celsus had briefly mentioned a form of insanity he called insania lupina, or wolf madness, in his work De Medicina, though he provided far less detail. What unites these early medical writings is their fundamental perspective. For these physicians, the werewolf was not a supernatural monster to be hunted or a sinner to be condemned, but a suffering human being whose mind had been captured by a terrible sickness. The howling in the cemetery was the cry of a broken psyche, not a demon. Their work represents a crucial, rationalist thread in the tapestry of the werewolf legend, an attempt to drag the phenomenon out of the shadows of myth and into the light of clinical observation and compassion, recognizing that the terror of transformation could be a pathology from within, as real and as treatable as any fever. To truly grasp why the moon became so irrevocably tied to the werewolf's curse, we must look beyond the forests of medieval Europe and into the starry vault of the heavens themselves, to a time when the moon was not a cold rock in the sky, but a living, breathing deity. Across nearly every ancient culture, the moon was personified as a powerful god or goddess, and their domains almost always included the very concepts that would later define the werewolf myth: cycles of change, the mysteries of the night, madness, and most importantly, transformation. The connection wasn't invented for a horror story. It was woven into the fabric of human belief for thousands of years, providing a deep, symbolic well from which the werewolf legend would eventually drink. Consider the ancient Greeks, who saw the moon not as one entity, but as a triad of goddesses who perfectly captured its phases. There was Selene, the full moon, often depicted as a beautiful woman crowned with a luminous halo, driving her chariot across the night sky. She represented the moon's power in its most complete and glorious form. Then there was Artemis, the crescent moon, the virgin huntress who roamed the wilderness with her pack of hounds, fiercely independent and connected to the untamed natural world. Finally, there was Hecate, the new moon, the ancient goddess of witchcraft, crossroads, and ghosts, who held sway over the darkest night and the most potent magic. This triple goddess embodies the entire lunar cycle: the light, the hunt, and the hidden dark. It's Hecate's role that is particularly telling. As a mistress of transformation and a guide to the underworld, she presided over the boundaries between states of being, between the human and the spirit world. Followers who sought her favor might leave offerings at crossroads, hoping to gain a fraction of her power to change their fate or their form. In this framework, a transformation under the dark of a Hecate moon wasn't just possible, it was a recognized aspect of her divine influence. This pattern of a transformative moon deity repeats across the ancient world. In Egypt, the god Khonsu was a master of time and cycles, depicted as a mummified youth with a lunar disk on his head. His name means traveler, reflecting the moon's journey across the sky, and he was believed to possess tremendous regenerative powers, growing young again after waning, much like the moon itself. This power over cycles and renewal made him a god who could fundamentally alter states of being. The Romans worshipped Luna, whose silver light was believed to conjure dew and influence the growth of plants, but also to stir the minds of men, pulling them toward lunacy, a word derived directly from her name. Even in Mesoamerica, the Maya feared Ixchel, the jaguar goddess of the moon, medicine, and childbirth, a figure who combined creation with a fierce, predatory aspect. The critical link between these deities and the werewolf lies in the moon's most obvious feature, its perpetual cycle of disappearance and return. To ancient peoples, this was the greatest and most reliable transformation in the natural world. The moon died and was rebrightened every single month, a constant, visible promise that change was not only possible but was the fundamental order of the universe. This celestial rhythm governed everything from the tides to women's menstrual cycles to the planting and harvesting of crops. It was the great timer of destiny. So, when cultures began to tell stories about humans changing into animals, it was the most natural thing in the world to tether that change to the moon's own transformative power. If the moon itself could change so drastically, surely it could exert that same power over flesh and spirit. The full moon, in its brilliant peak state, represented the moment of maximum lunar influence, the time when its power to alter and influence the world below was at its absolute zenith. Therefore, it became the logical, inevitable trigger for a metamorphosis that defied nature. The moon's light did not cause the change, its divine, cyclical nature did. The werewolf's curse is, in a sense, a dark perversion of a sacred, ancient truth. The moon is, and has always been, the celestial lord of transformation. While the moon and madness provided a supernatural framework for the werewolf, the legend may have also drawn a terrifying power from something far more tangible and medical, very real, and often very misunderstood human conditions. Imagine living in a time before modern medicine, encountering a person whose body seemed to defy the very definition of humanity. Two genetic conditions in particular offer a compelling and heartbreaking biological basis for the archetype: hypertrichosis, which causes excessive hair growth over the entire body, and porphyria, a set of disorders that creates a profound and debilitating sensitivity to light. For centuries, individuals born with these conditions were not seen as patients, but as living proof that the beast was not just a story, it walked among them. Let's first consider hypertrichosis, sometimes dramatically called werewolf syndrome. This incredibly rare genetic condition results in an abnormal amount of hair growth in places where it typically doesn't occur, or hair that is unusually long and thick. In its most severe forms, the face can become entirely covered in fine, dark hair, obscuring the human features beneath. For a pre-scientific society, the sight of a person with universal hypertrichosis would have been shocking and inexplicable. This wasn't a unibrow or a particularly hairy beard. This was a fundamental challenge to the visual divide between human and animal. The individual's very appearance seemed to be a physical manifestation of the inner beast that folklore warned about. It's tragically easy to see how a community, steeped in stories of men transforming into wolves, would look upon someone with this condition and believe they were seeing a person caught in a permanent or partial state of metamorphosis. The hair was the evidence worn on the outside for all to see. History provides us with stark examples of how these individuals were treated, often being stripped of their humanity and displayed as monstrous curiosities. Perhaps the most famous case is that of Petrus Gonsalves, a 16th century man born with hypertrichosis who was taken from his home in the Canary Islands as a child and presented as a gift to the French court. He was not treated as a person but as a living specimen, a wild man to be studied and marveled at. Despite his obvious intelligence and humanity, he learned multiple languages and served at court. His entire identity was defined by his appearance. He was even painted alongside his family, his own children who inherited the condition, their portraits serving as a fascination for nobles who saw them not as a family but as a pack of human beasts. His life story is a heartbreaking glimpse into how a genetic accident could fuel the fires of myth, turning a man into a living legend and a prisoner of his own DNA. The second condition, porphyria, contributes a different but equally potent set of symptoms to the werewolf mosaic. Porphyria is not one disease but a group of disorders caused by a buildup of chemicals called porphyrins in the body. The symptoms of certain types of porphyria read like a checklist for a classic monster. Acute sensitivity to light is a hallmark. Exposure to sunlight can cause severe, blistering burns, painful skin lesions, and even scarring that disfigures the skin and causes it to tighten and crack around the lips and gums, making the teeth appear more prominent and fang-like. To avoid this agonizing pain, sufferers would naturally retreat into the safety of darkness, becoming nocturnal creatures by necessity, not by choice. Furthermore, some forms of porphyria can cause the urine to take on a port wine or purple hue, a detail that would have seemed demonic or supernatural to an observer. In severe cases, the condition can also lead to neurological issues, including anxiety, agitation, and even hallucinations. When you combine this cluster of symptoms, a person who is physically scarred by the sun, who only ventures out at night, whose appearance might be unsettling, and who may be acting strangely due to pain or neurological distress, you have a perfect storm for werewolf accusations. The narrative practically writes itself, a reclusive figure hiding by day and only seen in the gloom of night, whose features are distorted and who behaves in a disturbed manner. This wasn't a person who chose to become a monster. They were suffering from a devastating illness that made them look and act in ways that perfectly aligned with the community's deepest fears. Their very biology betrayed them, marking them as something other than human. It's crucial to understand that these conditions were not just minor curiosities, they were life-altering and often isolating. There was no treatment, no understanding, and certainly no compassion from a world that operated on superstition. An individual with hypertrichosis might be forced into a life of seclusion or exploitation as a circus freak. A person suffering a porphyric attack would be in excruciating pain with no way to explain it, their agony perhaps misinterpreted as the writhing of a beast fighting against its own transformation. These real human experiences provided a constant, tangible anchor for the werewolf myth. They were the evidence that people could point to, the physical proof that the stories had a basis in reality. The legend was no longer just a tale about a cursed king from long ago or a strange tribe in a distant land. It was the story of the unsettling hermit who lived on the edge of the village, the person your parents warned you about because they looked different and lived in the dark. Biology, in its cruelest forms, gave the nightmare a face, and in doing so, made the werewolf legend more terrifyingly real than any ghost story could ever be. This deep connection between warrior and wolf, so vividly embodied by the Norse Ulfhidnar, was not an isolated phenomenon. It appears to have been a widespread feature across the ancient Indo-European world, a shared spiritual thread that bound together cultures from the steppes of Russia to the forests of Germania. Beyond the battlefield ferocity of the berserker, there is compelling evidence for organized wolf cults, secretive societies where initiation rituals involved a symbolic and perhaps psychological shedding of one's humanity to become temporarily part of the wolf pack. These rituals were not about becoming a monster, they were about accessing a primal source of power, and they may represent one of the most direct and ancient wellsprings of the transformation narrative. To understand these cults, we must look to the oldest roots of European civilization, to a people whose influence would ripple out for millennia, the Proto-Indo-Europeans. Linguistic evidence provides our first clue. The very word for wolf in many European languages shares a common, ancient root. The Proto-Indo-European term was likely W. elocute voiceless KWOS, which evolved into the Latin lupus, the Greek lycos, the Sanskrit Vileta 15 bka, and the Old English wolf. This shared vocabulary suggests a shared cultural concept of the wolf that predated the dispersal of these peoples across the continent. For these nomadic, pastoralist tribes, the wolf was not just another animal, it was a potent rival, a master hunter, and a symbol of the untamed wilderness that surrounded them. It's within this context that we can imagine the first wolf brotherhoods forming, groups of young men who sought to harness the wolf's power through imitation and ritual. Some of the most fascinating archaeological evidence for these practices comes from the Scythians and Sarmatians, nomadic horse cultures of the Eurasian steppes. Excavations of Scythian burial mounds or kurgans have revealed warriors buried not just with their weapons, but with ritual artifacts that speak to a deep spiritual connection with wolves. Most striking are the ceremonial headdresses and garments crafted from actual wolf skins, often with the animal's skull still attached to form a helmet or hood. This was far more than practical camouflage, it was a powerful symbolic act. By literally wearing the skin of the wolf, the initiate was attempting to absorb its essence to become the predator spiritually. These weren't costumes for a play, they were sacred vestments for a ritual transformation, a physical tool to achieve a metaphysical state. The famed Golden Man of Issyk from Kazakhstan, a Scythian prince buried in a suit of gold, was also found with a tall, conical headdress reminiscent of such ritual wear, suggesting these traditions were reserved for the highest elite. Further west, among the Germanic tribes, we find echoes of this same wolf bond in the concept of the Menabun, the warrior bands. These were not standing armies but exclusive, initiatory brotherhoods of young men who lived on the fringes of society, between the civilized world of the village and the wild unknown of the forest. Their initiation rites were famously brutal, designed to break down the boy and forge him into a man. A key part of this process often involved a period of exile in the wilderness, where the initiate would have to survive by his wits, hunting and foraging like an animal. During this time, he might be given a wolf skin to wear and a new, lupine name. He was no longer a member of his tribe, he was a lone wolf, a creature of the wild. Only by surviving this symbolic death of his old self could he be reborn into the warrior brotherhood. This ritual of exile and return is a profound mythological pattern, and it mirrors the narrative of the werewolf itself. A man who leaves his community becomes a beast and then, in some stories, struggles to return. The Dacians, a powerful Thracian people in the Carpathian region, took this veneration a step further. They didn't just have wolf cults, they had a national standard, and it was a wolf. Their primary war banner was the Draco, a windsock-like standard with a wolf's head made of metal, often silver. When cavalry charged, air would rush through the open mouth, creating a terrifying, mournful howl that was meant to strike fear into the enemy and unify the Dacian warriors under a single totemic symbol. Their warriors, known for their ferocity, were sometimes called wolves or werewolves by their Roman adversaries. This wasn't just an insult, it was an acknowledgement of the terrifying, almost supernatural battle fury they displayed, a fury their own culture seemingly cultivated and celebrated. The wolf was their national totem, a sacred animal that embodied their strength and their indomitable spirit. So how did these sacred rites of passage give rise to the terrifying folktales of cursed beast men? The answer likely lies in a process of cultural distortion and fear. To the members of the cult, the ritual was a controlled, temporary, and empowering experience. They chose to become the wolf for a sacred purpose, but to an outsider, to a settled farmer living in a Roman province, the sight of these wild men from the forest, clad in wolf skins, howling and engaging in ecstatic rituals, would have been utterly petrifying. They wouldn't see a sacred initiate, they would see a monster. As these old pagan religions were supplanted by Christianity, the church had a vested interest in demonizing these ancient practices. What was once a sacred channeling of animal power was reframed as a demonic pact. The voluntary ritual became an involuntary curse. The wolf skin, once a holy garment, became the evidence of a satanic transformation. The warrior who could call upon the wolf spirit became the man damned to become the wolf against his will. The rituals of the Menabund, passed down through generations as frightening campfire stories, slowly shed their original context, leaving behind only the core, terrifying image, that of a man, through some dark magic, turning into a wolf. The ancient rite of passage, stripped of its meaning and purpose, became the stuff of nightmare. From the prehistoric fear of the wolf's howl echoing in the dark to the sacred shamanic rituals seeking its power, from the divine punishment of a blaspheming king to the whispered rumors of entire tribes that transformed, we have journeyed through the incredibly diverse and ancient roots of the werewolf myth. We have seen how the legend is not a single story but a tapestry woven from countless threads: Greek curses, Norse warrior cults, Celtic tragedies, Slavic demons, and clinical diagnoses from Roman physicians. Each culture, from the Mesopotamians with Enkidu to the Celts with their talking wolves of Ossuary, projected its own unique fears, values, and spiritual understandings onto this potent idea of human and beast combined. The werewolf has been a warning against sin, a symbol of untamed wilderness, a feared heretic, a tragic figure, and a respected spiritual conduit, its meaning shifting dramatically depending on the time and place of the telling. This rich and varied ancient history fundamentally shaped the modern werewolf we know today. The medieval church's demonization fused these disparate threads into a unified archetype of pure evil, a servant of the devil. The horrific real-world panic of cases like Peter Stump and the Beast of Gavorden then injected that archetype with a terrifying credibility, cementing specific details like vulnerability to silver into the lore. Gothic literature and finally Hollywood streamlined these elements, taking the curse, the full moon, the physical agony of transformation, and the silver bullet to create the iconic, tortured monster of film and fiction. But understanding its ancient origins allows us to see so much more lurking beneath the surface of that Hollywood image. The modern werewolf is not just a monster, it is the inheritor of thousands of years of human anxiety about our own nature, our capacity for violence, and the thin, fragile line between civilization and the wild that exists both outside our door and within our own hearts. This journey through the shadowy forests of history reveals that the werewolf is perhaps humanity's most enduring mirror. We created it, and in its reflection we have always seen ourselves, our deepest fears, our darkest potential, and our eternal struggle to define what it truly means to be human. So, as we conclude this exploration, we want to hear from you. With this incredible tapestry of ancient stories laid out, from Lycaon's divine punishment and the Norse Ulf, Na to the tragic wolves of Ossuary and the clinical observations of Roman doctors, which ancient werewolf origin story fascinates you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed unraveling this historical mystery, be sure to subscribe for more deep dives into the legends that have shaped our world.